And I have a couple slides I'll go through, and then we'll get into the bulk of the course, which will be a demo of setting up QGIS with Mergin maps. And I should also let everyone know that since everyone's Danish here today, jeg er en gang med at lære dansk, men min dansk er ikke så godt. Ikke godt nok at holde kurses på dansk, so jeg tager den på engelsk. But I wanted to let everyone know that I can understand a lot of Danish and I can speak some Danish. So if we need to speak some Danish, we can probably do that today. But I'll take it mostly in English. So I'm going to be giving you an assignment after today's session where you'll just be basically repeating the steps that I show you today to collect some data. And then I have some things like screenshots that you'll turn into me to show that you were able to complete the task. And when I get that, then I will give you the course certificate. Some of the resources that you'll be getting are a set of step-by-step instructions for everything that I go through today. And in there are links to a series of YouTube videos for each task, so that you can also just watch a short YouTube video for a certain task if you want to remember how to do it. And then the recording of this class session. And there's no course data because you're going to be creating it yourself. And I'll send all these resources to you as soon as we're finished this afternoon. This is the official QGIS certificate that you'll get when you complete the course. So there are two QGIS related data collection apps. We're going to be focusing on Mergin maps produced by Lutra Consulting today, but there is also QField, which many of you have probably heard of as well, developed by QGIS CH in Switzerland. And I started using Mergin maps earlier for the most part because they were the first one to make their app available on both iOS and Android. QField is now also capable of doing that, so it has caught up a little bit. But I think another reason I prefer Mergin maps is that synchronization component of Mergin maps works really, really well. So we'll see that today. And I think everyone is probably okay with the software requirements. I'm going to be using QGIS 3.2.8 today, the current long-term release. So Mergin maps is the easiest way to take basically your QGIS project out into the field, and then you can edit data, capture data through your mobile device once you're outside. You can then use Mergin maps to store and track changes to your spatial data and your QGIS project. So it's closely integrated with QGIS through the plugin. And it's also fully open source, so there's no vendor lock-in. We can discuss that later. There's a few different ways you could access Mergin maps. You can have a subscription through Lutra Consulting. You could also consult with Septima. We also have we're hosting Mergin maps for customers, and then they've also open sourced the Mergin map stack, so you can install your own version of your own Mergin map server in your office and be in full control of your data and everything else. So there's a few different options for getting this set up in an office. And Mergin maps as a platform has a few different pieces to it. So there's the cloud service where you can log into merginmaps.com and enter your credentials to get to your account. So this from the website, you can see your different QGIS projects up here. You can track changes to the data and the projects, manage versions. You can actually download a project may have 40 different versions as you've gone through collecting data and making changes, and you can download the project at each stage. So it's almost, in a way, I think of it as GitHub for QGIS projects. Some people use Mergin maps simply to share a QGIS project, even if they're not doing data collection. So it can be used in some ways like that as well. Then there's the QGIS plugin, which shows up in the browser panel as a data provider, and it will show you the projects that you have. So these that have this folder icon are ones that are located on my computer, and these are other projects I've created. And I could, since the cloud icon indicates that this exists in my Mergin Maps cloud account online, and I can use the plugin to download it locally to my computer. It also has a toolbar that lets you synchronize and make a Mergin Maps project. Then there's the Mergin Maps input app. And so when you log into the Mergin Maps input app and you have some projects, all your projects will be listed on the projects page of the app, and you can download and work with any of the projects that you've created. So this little download icon indicates that this exists in the cloud, but not on my mobile device. So I could press that to download it to my phone. This icon indicates that there's been changes made, and so I need to synchronize it. So it's very intuitive from that perspective. Once you open up a project, it's going to open up as a map on your phone, and it's going to honor all the QGIS symbology that you set up. So it'll look exactly as it did in QGIS. And it will give you, for example, a little indication of your current GPS accuracy, and you can press the record button to start collecting data. And here I'm collecting tree data, and so I'm then taken into my form view, and I can answer all the questions, take a picture, and then save the point in this case. So one change that happened just a few months ago at the very end of January this year is that Mergin Maps created these things called workspaces. So you can visit the link down below on this page to read more about this. But basically, this is now what they have as their billing entity. So if your organization or your communa signs up for an account with Mergin Maps, that would be your workspace. So each workspace is tied to a subscription. And so it replaces what had previously been called organizations and personal namespaces if you had your own private account. So your workspace is going to be your organization. And so this workspace can serve your entire team. It can have multiple Mergin Maps projects in it. And individual users or data collectors can be invited by email to a workspace as a guest or a member. So this is one of the nice aspects of Mergin Maps, is that you can have a project that you set up for data collection. And if you're going to have people in the community, for example, do a crowdsourcing effort, they can be invited by email to be a guest of your project and go out and use it without having an account. That can be quite nice. And you can set the permissions that they have. They can be have like read access, write access, or administration access. So you can set what kind of access you want different users to have to your project. So when you're working with the Mergin Maps platform, most of the work initially, like today, is going to be done in QGIS, setting up a project from scratch that we're going to use to collect data for trees. So you set up your project in QGIS. You can, of course, use an existing QGIS project as well. That's also an option. And then you use the plugin to push that up to the Mergin Maps cloud. And then you can get on the input app on your mobile phone, pull that project down, start working with it. And at that point, you can just start synchronizing the data back and forth between mobile and desktop so that everything is current on both sides. There are easier ways to set up a Mergin Maps project than what we're going to walk through today. So basically today, I'm going to show you the way to set up a project that gives you the most flexibility with data collection. But you can also create a very basic project from the Mergin Maps input app. If you open up the app and log in, you'll see this orange create project button. And it would be a simple one where you just create like a survey layer and enter your field names that you want to have in there and go out and use it. The same option exists from the Mergin Maps web. There's this create project button here that you can use to create a similar project online. And then in the QGIS Mergin Maps plugin, you also have an option to create a new basic QGIS project from there. So those are all easier, faster ways to get started, but they don't, again, give you kind of basically as much flexibility and options to customize the project as what we're going to walk through today. And if you have questions as I go through this, feel free to, you're welcome to interrupt me and ask a question. Another option that's kind of a new feature, when you open up the Mergin Maps input app on your phone and log in, there will be a couple projects in there that are basically getting started projects. So you can open these, everyone gets access to these. And so the start here and the capturing field data tour are just projects that open up and guide you through how to use the input app and how to collect field data. So they're just tutorials basically that show up on your phone. So those are also available. So today we're simply going to collect point data for this course, but you can collect point, line, or polygon data with Mergin Maps. You can have multiple survey layers per project. And if you are collecting line or polygon data, there's an option to set it to streaming so that it collects a vertex every 3 seconds as you walk down a path, for example, and it'll collect that line data or the perimeter of an ion dom as you walk. So you can do any kind of geometry, and you can have multiple survey layers per project. So I'm going to show you today how to set up a project to conduct a tree survey, since that's one thing I can be sure that you have nearby that you can go and collect data on and play around with Mergin Maps here. So the basic workflow today is first preparing a project. This is where you maybe load background layers like background maps, set up your survey layers, set up the forms. That's probably most of the work. Apply styling to the layers. We're going to look at setting up map themes and why you may want to do that. And then set up some project properties, like defining which layers are survey layers and which are background layers. Once the project is set up, you can use the plugin to create a Mergin Maps project from your QGIS project, and then it gets pushed up to the cloud. You can then work with the input app to go out and collect data, synchronize your changes back, get back into QGIS, and use the plugin to synchronize again and pull it into QGIS desktop. So the first part, preparing the project, is most of the work. There are some best practices that everyone's recommended to follow. So first, when you're working with Mergin Maps, it's important that you have everything in a single folder. So you create a folder for your project, and then everything goes into that project folder, all your file-based data, your QGIS project file, and anything else. So we're going to start with that, just creating a folder today. If you're going to want background maps, XYZ tile services or WMS, WMST services are fantastic. So here in Denmark, you can use the base maps that come with data fasooning, for example, to use as base maps. The other best practice is to use GeoPackage for all your data. I know several of you have want to use PostGIS, and that's a little more advanced topic, but I'm going to show you that it is possible to use Mergin maps with a Postgres DB sync tool to synchronize your data with a Postgres database. So that is perfectly possible to do, but we're going to work with a Geo package today. And you also need a different Geo package for each individual survey layer. And that's simply because that avoids changes to the database schema. So currently, any change to the database schema can cause conflicts during the synchronization process. So an example of changing a database schema might be adding or removing a layer from a Geo package, adding or removing fields from a layer, and things like that. So as long as you have one Geo package for every individual survey layer, you avoid any potential synchronization issues. And then another thing you can do in project properties is distinguish between layers that are background layers and survey layers. So some layers may be there just for context or for navigation, and then there may be others that are going to be survey layers, and so we can distinguish those through project properties. So I'm going to get out of PowerPoint now and into QGIS, and we're going to set up a basic project. So here I am in QGIS, and you can see the Mergin Maps toolbar turned on here because I have the plugin installed already. And I'm going to switch to the browser panel. And the first thing I'm going to do is create a folder for today's demo. So this is my folder for the course here. And I'm just going to right click on this and create a new directory and call it May course. And then I'm going to save my project into that folder. So I'm going to click Save Project, and I'm going to go into my course folder and save this QGIS project in there. And I'll call it May course as well. So now my QGIS project file is in that folder I just created. And I'm going to start by just adding one of the XYZ tile services that ships with QGIS. There's an OpenStreetMap layer that ships with QGIS. Everyone should have access to this. And so I can easily add this to my map. And I'm going to zoom into my area. So I'm up in Gribsko, in Helsinge. Here it is. So this is where I'm located, kind of in the centrum of Helsinge, near the Gellikare. So this will be my data collection study area. And I could also use data for Suning and add, one of the background maps, such as aerial photography, from data for Suning as well. I usually have an international set of participants for this class. So that's the only reason I usually start with the XYZ tile services. But if you're in Denmark, you probably are going to use the data for Suning services. So next, I'm going to create a survey layer. So I'm going to go to the layer panel, create layer, and create a new Geo package layer. And I'm going to save this into the folder that I created, May course. And I'm going to call this survey. And for the table name, I'll call it tree survey. I'll make it geometry type point. And I'm going to set the coordinate system to 25832, our UTM zone. And now what I can do is start to add the different fields that I'm going to be collecting data into. So it'll be a tree survey. So I'm going to have one thing I'm going to collect is the tree species. So I'm going to add a field called tree species. And I'm going to make that a text field. Add to field list. The next is going to be tree type. And here I'm going to basically be collecting data on whether it's an evergreen tree or a deciduous tree. The next field will be fruit tree. And so this will be whether I collect data on whether it's a fruit tree or not. So for this, I'm going to, instead of making text, I'm going to make it a Boolean, true or false, yes or no, for whether it's a fruit tree. Next is circumference. So I'm going to measure the circumference in centimeters. So I'm going to make this a numeric field. I'll make it decimal. I'm going to also add one called GPS accuracy. So I can show you some of the variables that Mergin maps come with. So I'll make this decimal as well. It's possible to have Mergin maps record the GPS accuracy for you. I'm going to take a photograph. So I'm going to have a field called photograph. And this will be a text field because it's just going to store the path to the photograph as text. And then the date. So the date that the tree was recorded. So this will be a date time field. I'm going to add a notes for just a text field for anything that I don't anticipate wanting to record when I'm outside. I'll have a notes column for. And then finally, the last field will be collector. So this will be where I can record who collected the data. So this is a nice set of things specific to trees, and then some that might be useful for almost any data collection project. So I've got my layer saved into a GeoPackage in my course folder. It's in the correct coordinate system. I've got all my fields added, so I can click OK. And now my tree survey is added here. So now I can just do some styling to this. So instead of the default marker, I'm just going to kind of make a target symbol. So I'm going to give this a fill color of transparent fill. I'm going to make the outline red and make it a little thicker and a little bigger ring. And then I'm going to add another symbol layer type. I'm going to make this a cross. I'm going to make this the same color. Again, make it a little bit thicker and increase the size. So now I get kind of a target symbol for my trees. Save my project. And one thing we can do, if you anticipate being outside collecting data and potentially being outside of a network, the GPS will still function, but you would lose access to your streaming base maps, for example. So it's possible to create MB tile files for our base maps and then set up map themes so that we have an online version of OpenStreetMap and an offline version of OpenStreetMap. So that if we're out in the field and we run into a connectivity issue, we can switch to the offline map theme and continue collecting data. So I'm going to show you how you can do that. I'm going to go to the processing toolbox here. I want to do one thing. There's a plugin that's really useful for this called the Zoom Level plugin. Before I get started on this, I'm going to go to plugins, manage and install plugins. And I'm going to search for Zoom Level. And I have it turned on already, but this is a plugin that basically down in your status bar, it'll display the scale that you're currently at between 0 and 20. And it becomes useful when I'm creating these MB tile layers so that I can set the zoom level appropriately. Otherwise, I risk making my MB tile layer really, really large. And so I can keep it to a minimum here by using this zoom level plugin. So if I zoom in a little bit tighter here, you'll see that now it says I'm at zoom level 17.77. So it doesn't let you set the zoom level. It's just going to show what you're currently at. So now if I go into the processing toolbox and I search for MB tiles, in raster tools, I find the generate XYZ tiles MB tiles algorithm. And I can open this up, and I want to just turn on the layers that I want to create an MB tiles for. So I'm going to turn everything off except OpenStreetMap. And I'm going to choose the extent as use current map canvas extent right here. So I'm going to use my current map canvas for the extent of MB tiles. And here it asks you for your zoom level. And so I know that I'm at 17.7 here, so I don't need anything below that. I'm going to put 18 as my minimum zoom and 20 as my maximum zoom. And then I'll save this to a file in my folder. Make course, and I'll call this OSM offline. And click run. So you can see it goes and it generates tiles for each zoom level that you've specified. And I can check to see how big of a file that generated. For example, when you first have a trial account with Mergin Maps, your limit is 100 megabytes. So in that case, I want to make sure this is a small file, and it's only 5 megabytes, this MB tiles layer. So that's good. And so I can now create one for the orthophoto. And I think for this, I'm just going to keep it orthophoto MB tile layers get to be even bigger. So I'm just going to keep this at 18 and 18 and change the name to orthophoto. And click run. And I can close, and we can see how big that is. That's nice and small too. So less than 5 megabytes each. So now I can add those layers. And now I have on and offline version of each of my base maps. So I can save my project. I actually forgot one little step that I don't really need to redo for this demo, but there is another setting in these XYZ tile layers for OSM, for example. So this OpenStreetMap layer has a tile resolution setting in layer properties. So it's on the source tab of the XYZ tile data, and the tile resolution is unknown. And another good practice for these is to set this to 256 by 256. So this will make it the labels on the base map more readable on a high resolution mobile display like you have on your phone. So this can be a good setting to use for the XYZ tile services. So actually, I'm going to recreate that really quick. So I'm just going to go to processing history and open up that processing algorithm and turn on just the OpenStreetMap again and regenerate it now that I've set that property for it. Okay, so I now have versions of each of these. So what I can do now is set up map themes so that on the mobile device, I can switch to offline mode if I need to. So I'm going to turn on tree survey and turn on the OpenStreetMap XYZ tile service. And I'm going to go to this menu for manage map themes. And I'm going to add a theme. I'm going to call this theme OSM online. So map themes, if you haven't used them before, basically let you define which layers in your project participate in that theme. So this theme is going to consist of the tree survey and the OpenStreetMap, and it's called OSM online. I can then turn on OSM, the MB tiles layer, and go back to map themes and add another new theme and call this OSM offline. And now that I have two map themes, I can go back here and I can switch between offline and online. And it knows which layers participate in that. So then I can turn on the orthophoto. Where is the orthophoto? Maybe data fasooning is having some problems here. There's the MB tiles. Let me go ahead and create this theme. Orthophoto offline. There it goes. And then the last map theme is orthophoto online. So I have my 4 map themes. You can go and check these to make sure they're working okay. And if you've made a mistake, you can simply turn on the correct layers and go back and replace a theme if you have to. Okay, so that's the basic setup for the project. There are a couple project level properties that are worth setting. So recall that we want to distinguish between background layers and survey layers. We can go to project properties. And we can go to the data sources tab here. And we can identify if we had multiple vector layers in here, which were, if we had a vector layer that, let's say that was like the study area boundary, maybe that's not going to be a survey layer, so we could check read only for it. But here we want the tree survey to be writable, so we want that unchecked. And we don't need these layers to be identifiable, so we can uncheck identifiable for those, but we want the tree survey to be identifiable and searchable, and we definitely don't want it to be read-only. So this is a useful place to set things, especially when you have more than one vector layer. Oh yeah, the other setting that's useful is to go to the view settings. So when you're in the mobile app outside, Input has a setting that allows you to zoom to the full extent. And if you're working with a global layer like OpenStreetMap or even a Denmark-wide layer like the orthophoto, it's kind of inconvenient to get zoomed out to the whole extent of that layer when you're just working in a small study area. So here we can set the definition of the full extent within our project. So I'm going to click this set project full extent, and I'm going to use the current map canvas extent so that when we zoom to full extent, it's just going to zoom out to our survey area. Click OK, save my project. My notes. Okay, so the last big step in QGIS is to set up your survey form. So this involves the tree survey layer properties. So we're going to switch to the fields form, attributes form rather. And we here in the attributes form tab, we see all the fields that we added. And here we can configure the widgets for each one of these to make our data collection form a little more intelligent. So there are a wide array of field forms, widgets, and Mergin maps. Where is that page I have for these? Mergin Maps has a nice help page that shows all the different QGIS widgets. If you're not familiar with those, I'll bring up that link. Paste this into the chat. So this page on the Mergin Maps documentation goes through setting up field forms, and it has a nice gallery of all the different widget types that are in QGIS that we can use to make a better data collection form. So for example, if you want to have a pick list, that would be a value map. You can configure defaults, and especially for numeric data, you have a range of different input types: slider, numeric, dial, etc. So this is a nice summary of all of those. So we can start with FID. So if we select FID, this is simply part of the file format of a GEO package. It comes automatically with a GEO package, and we don't need to see it. So under here where it says widget type, we can set this to hidden so that we don't see the FID. It gets created as we collect data, but it's not going to be visible. Next is tree species. And so here we could configure this in a variety of ways. Here I'm just going to use the plain text edit widget type, which will basically allow the user to just type into the phone whatever the tree species is. But instead of tree_species, you can also use the alias up here as a prompt for the data collector so that they know what they're supposed to be entering here. So for example, I could type enter tree species so that the data collector knows what they're supposed to do with this question. For all of these, there are constraints and defaults that you can use. So we'll look at some use cases for these in other fields. Next, we have tree type. So tree type is where we're wanting people to collect whether it's deciduous or evergreen. So we want a pick list. So we can choose a value map as the widget type for this field. And then down here in this widget type box, we can enter the values. So we can type evergreen. And I can use here the same value for the value and the description. Sometimes you may want to have a code, a numeric code for each of these, and then a verbal description of it. But here I'll just type in the same for each. So deciduous would be the other choice. And so when you have a value map, it's the benefit is that the data collector can't make a data entry error. They have to pick one of the choices instead of typing. And then we can, for an alias, type deciduous or evergreen. And so we have that one set. Next is fruit tree. So this was Boolean. This is a yes or no. Is it a fruit tree or not? And the default widget type for a Boolean field is this checkbox. And so you can configure this how you want that to be listed as true or false, or 0 or 1 as stored values. I'm just going to use the default true or false and enter the question fruit tree question mark as the alias. So we'll say true if it's a fruit tree, false if it isn't. The next is the circumference field, and this is where we want someone to measure the circumference of the trunk of the tree. And so this is going to be a numeric data, and we're going to, instead of a text edit, choose range. Range is usually what you want when you have some kind of numeric data. And with the range widget, you have 3 different settings for that. You can choose editable, which will just allow the data collector to enter a number. You can set a minimum and a maximum and a step for that, but they just enter the number. There's also slider, which will be a slider bar between a min and max value, and then dial, which is a rotary dial for the same thing. So it's 3 different interfaces for entering numbers. I'm just going to choose editable, and I'm going to enter the minimum and maximum here. So the minimum is going to be, the maximum here is going to be 100, and the minimum is going to be 5. You can also include a step. So I'll use 0.5 as the step, so people can enter anything between 5 and 100. Why isn't it taking the step? Oh, did I may have not set the precision for this field correctly. Normally you should be able to enter a step when it's a decimal value. That's that. The next one in the list is GPS accuracy. So Mergin Maps comes with a nice set of what are called position variables. I have them on the slide here. So these are all variables that QGIS won't know anything about, but the Mergin Maps input app on your mobile device will. So when you go out and collect data, you can use these as default values for fields. So if we want to know the GPS accuracy, we can use position horizontal accuracy as the default value for that field. And Mergin Maps will just input the value when you save the data. And so there's a lot of nice different position variables that you can include in here. including speed, altitude, vertical accuracy, etc. So you can use any of these in your data collection form. And so when I say that QGIS won't know anything about it, I would use this as the default value for GPS accuracy. So I can go in here and type in this variable. And I just have to spell it correctly so that I use the right thing here. Yeah. So it's position, horizontal accuracy. And so it will give you a preview of null because it's not a QGIS variable. So QGIS doesn't know what this is, but Mergin maps will. And then for photograph, the next field, this will be a widget type of attachment. So we're going to go down in the list of widget types and choose attachment for this. And you can configure the settings for how you want it to store the path. I'm going to choose relative to project path. And down below in the integrated document viewer section, you want to set this to image. I'm going to click the drop down and set this to image. So we'll have the photograph set up, and for the alias, you could say, take a photo.
Good. I have a question.
Mm.
Can you have multiple photographs
You can.
per object?
You can. Yeah. It involves I'm going to put a link in the chat about that. So it involves setting up basically having a flat file in your project and setting up a relation between that and your main survey layer. And they describe the directions here. So you go into the project properties and configure that relation between that table and your survey layer. And it will then allow you to capture multiple photographs per point.
Okay.
The next one is date. So for date, we can again use some handy defaults here. You can also configure the format. So we can set it up so it's maybe not going to save everything out to the second if you want. You could just have the simple date and time, date and minute and hour. So you can configure the way that the timestamp is displayed. It's going to use a calendar pop-up by default to choose the date, but we can set the default for this to the now function. So if we just type now with opening and closing parentheses, will return the current date and time. And so you can see this is a QGIS function. So QGIS shows you a preview of what that will return. And then for notes, this will just be a text edit, but you have the option with any of these text widgets to set them to be multi-line, so it could store more text, or you could configure it as HTML, but I'll just check multi-line for this. And then finally, we have collector. So this is going to be the name of the person collecting data. So you could, for example, as a default, go in here and I could type my name. And if you were going to enter a default value, which is text, you didn't enclose it in single quotes like that. But I could also use a variable for this, and there are some Mergin map variables that you could use. So let me drag my PowerPoint back over here. So these are optional Mergin map variables that you have access to. And so these get installed with the Mergin Maps plugin. So QGIS does know about these since they're part of the plugin. And so instead of my name, I could use my Mergin username at variable, which will return my username, which is Geomenki. So you could use any of these, Mergin project owner, etc. So these are all different variables you have access to. So I'm going to use Mergin username. I'll just copy it off my PowerPoint here as the default value. And so when I put that in there, since I have the plugin installed and logged in, it returns my Mergin Maps username here. So you can configure all of your forms this way so that you have more intelligent data collection thing. So another thing you can do at this point is use the drag and drop designer to design a better looking form. So where it says auto generate up here, I can use the drag and drop designer in QGIS to configure how I want my data collection form to look. So I can add a container and call this tree info, for example. So here's tree info, and then I could include tree species, tree type, fruit tree, circumference, all as aspects of the tree. And then I could add another one called other details as a second form, and I could have the GPS accuracy, photograph, date, notes, and collector here. And maybe actually photograph could go up with tree. And then FID I can just remove again because I don't need to see it. So my data collection form would be broken into 2 tabs. So if you have a lot of different data elements that you're collecting, it can make it a little more manageable to break it up into tabs for the data collector in this way. So I can click OK. I'm going to save my project. And let me show you what this might look like, because we can look at the field form in QGIS. So if I put my tree survey layer into edit mode, and I add a point for a tree here, you can see my form. This is the way it would look in the app, essentially, where I have tree info and other details. So I can answer all the questions. And here I have that pick list since I set it up as a value map. Here it's defaulting to the current date and time since I put that as the default. And it also is defaulting to my collector since I put that as the default. And I won't collect this point right now, but that's the way it will look on the phone too. So now what we can do is use the plugin to make this a Mergin Maps project. And so importantly, we have all of our data in a single folder. We have the QGIS project, the MB tile layers, my geo package, all in the same folder together. So we are set up to use the plugin to just make this a Mergin Maps project. And so we can do that from this Mergin Maps toolbar, when you first get in, you'll have to configure the Mergin Maps plugin on this little gear icon and log in with your username and your password. And you can test the connection. Okay, and log in. And once you log in, this plus button becomes active to create a Mergin Maps project. And if you click this, we get these different options. So the first option is just if you wanted to start with an empty QGIS project and make a basic project using the Mergin Maps plugin, where you'd name a layer and add some fields to it and push it up to the cloud. And Mergin Maps would create the folder for it and everything else. If you have an existing QGIS project that you want to use in Mergin Maps, but you may have data not all packaged in the same folder, for example, you could use package current QGIS project, and Mergin Maps would take care of all of that repackaging and make a Mergin Maps project out of it. But we're going to use option number 3 because we've done everything according to the best practices, so we can use our current QGIS project as is. So now we give this a name, so I can call it May Course Demo. And you also have this option to make the project public. So a lot of organizations probably don't want to make their projects public. I'm going to check this so that you can access this project. So maybe I'll give it a better name. I'll call it Septima May Course Demo, so it'll be easier to find. And I'll click Finish. So now Mergin Maps is uploading this. I can hit Close. And now if I go to my account in the Mergin Maps cloud, let me refresh. I see my Septima May Course Demo 0 minutes ago that I just created. And so if I click on this in the Mergin Maps cloud, I'll see the QGIS project file, the MB tile layers, and the survey geo package, and how big each of those is. And I can go to the history, and I just have one version right now. If I go to the settings tab, this is where I could invite people to participate in this. It's already a public project, but I could change it back to private if I wanted to. I could transfer this project to a different workspace or delete the project if I'm finished with it. So for you, for example, you could go to Mergin Maps and log in and go to projects, and you could look for this Find Public Projects option. And you could search for the project I just created. You could search for Septima. And it'll find this project that I just created. You could click on it, and then you could clone it and clone it into your workspace, for example. So that's kind of a brief introduction to the Mergin Maps cloud. So let's see, we're a little past halfway, and I'm going to show you how to use the app next. So I'm going to, let's take like a 10-minute break, and we'll come back at 15 after, and I'll show you how to use the app. I'm going to configure a sharing app so you can see my phone and how this looks on the phone. We'll take a 10-minute break, and I'll pause the recording. Okay, is everyone back? Wait another second, make sure Fleming and Nikolai are back.
I'm back.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So hopefully everyone can see my my Android here on the screen. So I'm going to open up Mergin Maps here. And if I click on the home button here, you'll see the projects that I have downloaded on my device. Also, if I click on my little avatar, the little green man there up in the corner, you'll see my account, and you can also switch workspaces. If you have multiple workspaces, I can click on switch workspace and I'll see the different workspaces that I belong to, and I can switch which one I want to be working in. Click back. So I'm here at the home screen, and you can see there's that create project option. I'm going to click on projects down on the bottom green bar, the bottom navigation bar in the center. So now I'm looking at all the projects that I own, and I'm going to scroll down to find the September May course demo that we just created. So I need to download it. So I'm going to click the download link, and it begins downloading it to my phone. And I can then click on it to open up the project. There you go. So there is the map on my phone. So I'm indoors in my home office, so you can see my GPS accuracy is not so great, obviously. If I click down here on the more button, this is where I can zoom to project, which should take me just to my study area if I choose that. If I want to look at map themes, I can choose map themes. And you can see I have all the different map themes. I could choose to switch to OSM online or OSM offline. And then I could just use my fingers to pinch and zoom in to explore that. If I want to record a point, I would click the record button. It warns me that I have low GPS accuracy. And down here are my survey layers. I only have one survey layer, tree survey, but if you had multiple, you could choose which one you wanted to collect data for. So I'll click tree survey and then click the add plus button to start collecting information. So I'll say this is a cherry tree. Oops, misspelled it. It's deciduous. It is a fruit tree. The circumference is, I don't know, 50. And then I can take a photo. So I'm gonna, I can take a photo out of my office window here, cherry tree out there, and click OK. So there's the photo. And I can go to my other details tab. It's recorded the GPS accuracy, the date, notes. And I can click save, and I've saved one point. I could actually switch to my orthophoto layer and see where that point is. It's actually not in the right place. So it is possible to edit data in here too. So I could click record. Yeah, how do I? So if I want to edit the geometry, where is it? Tree survey. Why am I not seeing the edit geometry function here? Hold on a minute. I think, oh yeah, I have to, if I click on the tree that I just collected, then this button here would actually put it into a navigation mode where I could navigate to that point from my current position, or I can click the pencil to put this into edit mode, and I could click edit geometry, and I could just pan the map to where that tree actually is and click done and save. And now the tree is in the location where it actually is instead of my office. And so I could collect one more. Apple deciduous. Photo. Oh, what happened? Let me try that again. I think it's maybe because I'm indoors here. Okay. Switch to other details and choose edit geometry. And I'll put this where the tree actually is. Done and save. So I've collected 2 points now. And now that I've collected some data, there's a synchronization button. By default, it will synchronize automatically. And I think I just saw the pop-up that it had, but you can always press that to force it to sync. That's one of the settings. If we look at settings again, sometimes people also want to have an external GPS that has better accuracy than the onboard GPS on the phone. So in that case, there's this select GPS receiver option. And so if I had an external Bluetooth GPS receiver, for example, I could connect to that and use that instead of my default. This accuracy threshold is where if my accuracy goes above that, it's going to warn me that I have low GPS accuracy. There's also a streaming mode here. So those are some of the settings. So I'm going to now just go back to QGIS, and
I have one question, Kurt. When is the location recorded? Because I mean, when you go out and register a tree, you may be standing beside of it, but when you take the picture, you have to move away from it. So is the location of the tree recorded when you press save, or when is it done? So you have to move back to the tree.
Yeah, great question. So yeah, it's the GPS coordinates, the XY location is saved when you click save.
Yeah.
So you want to stand back to take a picture of the tree and then walk up to the trunk when you click save, so or to as close to the object as you can get, and then click save so you get an accurate position.
Okay, thanks.
So I'm going to click synchronize here in QGIS, and you can see that several changes were made. It gives me a summary, and I'll click sync. Downloading project data. And now I can zoom in and see where the 2 trees were that I collected data on. And if I click on one of those and use my view feature form, I will see the photo I took out my window and all the other details. Same with the other one. So at this point, I could also make changes in QGIS, and I could, collect additional trees here just from QGIS and enter all the information and click OK. And there's another option that the Mergin Maps platform comes with in QGIS is oh yeah, if I right click on the survey layer, this show local changes is part of the Mergin Maps plugin. And since I've made local changes, it will show me what I just added. I just added a beech tree, and it'll show me all the information about that. So that's considered a local change that I did here within QGIS. So it's possible to see and review changes like that. And at that point, you can choose to add that change to the current project. But that would add it as a separate layer. But what I could do is simply synchronize and sync my changes back now that I've collected something in QGIS. And now I can bring up my Mergin Maps app and synchronize. And now I see that third tree in the app that I collected in QGIS Desktop. So at this point, I can go back and forth and just keep track of my data there. And if I bring up the account in the Mergin Maps cloud and refresh the page here, I can click on my project and look at the history and see that I have now several versions of this project that have been created, where in each one I can see what was done. So version 4, for example, I can see that 2 features were added, 2 photographs were taken, 1 layer was modified. So it'll give you all the details about what was done at each version and allow you to download the project at that particular version. So any questions on how the basic platform works, or anything else you'd like to see?
Yeah, I have a question. The photographs, where they stored, are they only stored here online on the cloud, or do they get stored locally as well when you synchronize on the desktop?
Yeah, they'll get stored locally too. So if I open up my folder, you can see the 3 JPEGs here stored on my computer. There is something in Mergin Maps called selective sync, where you can basically choose what gets stored, what gets saved. Let me find this selective sync. So for example, if a bunch of data collectors are collecting data, you may only want to download to your local machine features that you've collected, not the rest of the team. I don't remember where that's located. Kind of a new feature. Here we go. Selective synchronization. I'm going to put this link in the chat as well. So selective synchronization allows you to control what gets downloaded so that you don't have to have such a heavy synchronization each time. You may only want certain features synchronized. So you may not want all the JPEGs, for example. And another thing in terms of photographs in Mergin Maps is if we go to project properties, you'll see that there's a Mergin Maps tab in project properties. So when you install the plugin, this is another place the plugin exists. And so there's a setting for selective sync. there's also a photo quality section. So you can set the quality of the photos that get saved. So if you're worried about space, for example, you could set the photo quality to low so that you're not consuming a bunch of space with large 5 megapixel photos each time something is taken. There's also a snapping setting in here. So this would have to do when you're editing geometries on the mobile device. You have 2 different snapping settings. We have 3. You have no snapping, then you have basic snapping and QGIS snapping. So this, if you had set up the snapping environment in your QGIS project, then the mobile device would follow that. Or Mergin Maps has its own basic snapping that you could choose to follow. And so it's all very well documented. So you can click on this documentation link to bring up more information about how that snapping works. And another nice feature they've added to the documentation is versions, since so you can see which versions of the plugin or which version of the input app this is implemented at. So if you're not seeing it, maybe it's because your app hasn't been updated or something like that. The other thing I wanted to share, since I know we have several in the class that are interested in working with PostgreSQL, is that Mergin Maps has produced this Mergin DB Sync software. So you can use this to synchronize with a PostgreSQL database. I can say it depends a little bit on if you're like we've at Septima have a project with GeoFA POC, and the data model is quite complex where there's a lot of database triggers and things like that. And so this Mergin DB Sync doesn't work well because it doesn't honor the entire complexity of the PostgreSQL schema that we've set up. But for basic data collection in a Postgres database, this works very well. So in our case, with that other project where we have a very large data model, we're simply bypassing Mergin Maps and we're connecting directly to the database with Mergin Maps, and it works. So it kind of depends on what you need to do. But if anyone has questions about that, I could put you in touch with one of my colleagues who knows how to set up that direct connect if you have a very complex data model you're working with. But there's a nice page for this DB Sync on GitHub where they describe how to set this up, and they have a getting started page for this, like a quick start guide that you could use to get started with this PostgreSQL DB Sync. I'll put this link in the chat. It simply requires a Docker container, and it's fairly quick to set up.
How does Mergin handle if there are 2 users that are simultaneously editing a feature?
It doesn't.
Maybe one goes in to delete the feature while the other is updating it or something like that.
Yeah, since it keeps track of the times in milliseconds, it doesn't really happen. It's almost impossible for 2 people to make an edit exactly the same time. So I have never seen that be a problem.
Cool.
Yeah. Just to show you some more features of this, there's also in the processing toolbox, Mergin Maps has some processing tools associated with it. And these are for creating reports or creating, basically showing the changes between two versions of the layer in a Mergin Maps project. So you could see what the changes were between two if you need to roll some back, for example. There's this create diff and this create report. Shows all the change sets for Mergin Maps and outputs them to a CSV file so that you can have some documentation on what's been done. And then there's this extract local changes. And this is similar to that local changes viewer I just showed. This would be if you've made edits in QGIS, which would then be considered local. So this would be a way to manage those local changes and extract them to their own layer, if that's something you need to do as part of your project management.
When you're editing the form for the application, is there anything in QGIS forms that isn't supported? I mean, you can get quite complex in those forms.
Mm-hmm.
So is there anything that's not supported?
Well, let's see. I know I don't think the color widget is supported on the mobile app. That's one that I've looked at. I thought it would be interesting to use the color widget if you were mapping something and you wanted to have the data collector choose the color of something. I've noticed that is not currently supported. But other than that, no, all the settings in here for using expressions for defaults or constraints should work fine, because the input app is basically a mini version of QGIS. It's using the same core code in QGIS, so it honors all of the QGIS functions and variables and expressions that you would write around that. So but
how does versioning work with Mergin if you want to roll something back?
That's a good question. I think I'd probably want to look that up. Maybe that's something we can address in next week's follow-up session, because I don't remember the procedure for that off the top of my head.
But it can be done.
Yeah, it can be done. I just can't remember how manual that has to be. I think the one of the keys is that if we bring up our Mergin Maps project, I have too many browser windows open here. Where is that? If I bring up my, the Mergin Maps cloud and log into my account so that I can see all the versions of my project. I can go into the history and I could download a certain version. So if something had to be rolled back to a previous version, you could simply download the project at that version and replace the project with an older version. But I don't know if there's a more elegant way to do it than that. I need to do a little research. It's a good question.
I was wondering if there's any way, okay, I work in a field where we go out with quite big areas, and maybe it would be interesting to subdivide these areas into interest areas.
Yeah.
Is there any a good approach to do that with this tool too?
There is. Where is that? Yeah, there's I'm forgetting what they call it, but they basically have a way of dividing up a project into areas or users. And in that way, you have so there's a tool in Mergin Maps to subdivide it, and I'm just forgetting what they call it. I'm not finding it when I search. Let me see if I know I have a presentation that covers that though. Here we go. Let me go to their blog. I know there's a blog entry. I might have to. It's not workspaces. Might have to save that one for next week too. I can't find it here in a minute. Yeah, I can't find it right now, but so we can look at that next week. But I can tell you that it's possible that they have a tool for doing that. I just don't remember what they call it.
That's okay.
They have like a name for it. One thing I want to let you know though is that one great resource beyond this course is that Lutra has a Slack channel for support. So you can use this merginmaps.com/community/join to join the Mergin Maps Slack channel, and they're really fast at troubleshooting problems or giving advice to you. It's kind of like the QGIS listserv, that kind of support for Mergin Maps. So this is another good place to get help when you need it or find answers to questions. So you've had some good questions. Is there anything else that you're wondering about? No. Okay, well, I will be sending you out the recording of this session and all the other resources, other videos and step-by-step instructions that I have and the assignment. And we will be back in the same Zoom meeting, same time next week, next Wednesday, for just a review session to answer any questions you might have about anything that came up for you, or and I have some homework to do to look up some of the questions you've come up with here that I didn't have answers to. So we can cover all of that next week. And certainly if you run into anything in the next week, feel free to email me about anything, and we can take a look at that. Okay. I'll stop.